Shabbat Shalom. For those of you who are joining us on YouTube, we're going to do another Sabbath session. I have a couple announcements to make. The first one is that we went ahead and we did our observance of the new moon, and so Passover is coming up. What we're going to go ahead and do, because there was a little bit of controversy concerning the new moon. Of course, you guys recall that I've stated in the past that there is there's a premise that the Father showed me about the personal nature of a individual when it comes to the feasts, and how he showed me that the Father's more concerned with the intention of the feast than he is necessarily with the timing, and that the timing is in the eye of the beholder. In other words, when a person sights the new moon, then that is the beginning of months, and then 14 days from that date, you have the actual Passover. So there's a couple things that I want to say about that. The first one is obviously there are people who are going to be reactive to that. I don't care. The reason I don't is because we're not doing church here. Church is that I dictate how something's going to be and you do it, right? I'm trying to teach you guys how to individually keep the feast days and how to individually become a corporate collective conscience of believers that are elite in dominion, energy, and of course, unity. Echad, not yachad. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because basically one of the biggest points that needs to be understood is at least you are actually doing it, right? You are not part of the group of people who anti-Semitically and anti-Torah decided to throw a pagan holiday as a replacer for the actual holy day of Passover. For those of you who are actually still sitting in the pew on Sunday mornings and dabbling in this ministry, I can tell you that that message isn't necessarily for you, and you probably don't really care about what day it's going to happen because you don't completely understand that yet. But the key element is that I'm training my replacements, and I want every one of my replacements to have the wherewithal and the ability and knowledge to be able to explain why they do what they do. So in that sense, I will tell you that I watched the moon, and I will actually show you this. I'll just go ahead and I'll go ahead and share the screen here, and basically we can take a look at this stuff. So let me go ahead and navigate to this and make sure that I am not broadcasting sound here. So let me turn the sound off. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to jump right into my tablet here. Oh, I didn't connect. Okay. Give me 1 second. We'll go ahead and connect this HDMI cable. And now we should have, okay, there we go. Now, so jumping into this app, this is called Star Walk 2 is what I use for watching the sky. And specifically, what I want to show you is that this is how I determine when a month starts or ends. So I don't go on the new moon right here. I go on the first visible crescent. Well, a 1% crescent is not going to be visible. However, Under certain atmospheric conditions, it can be visible, but it won't be a 1% crescent. And that's kind of what happened in this situation. So I didn't even look for the moon until that day right there, okay, which would have been the 10th. So evening of the 10th, I looked for the moon, and of course that would put us where? That would put us right on the full moon for Passover. However, there are people in my congregation, and I have taught this way. I have taught that you what? You observe the moon, you get a witness, you bear witness, and that is the new month, right? That's what I've taught you. Blow the shofar, it's done. Because why? Because we are very different from the rest. We are not going to go with an established calendar. We're not going to go with a guess. We're going to go with what we see. So a couple of my congregation members said, "Hey, I saw it the night before." And I was like, "Okay." So this is what we're going to do. First and foremost, let me tell you this. Our ministry is going to celebrate Passover from the evening of the 23rd on through the 24th. Okay. So basically, if I was to show you that in terms of a calendar, there's going to be a start point, which is going to be in the evening, and there's going to be an end point, which is in the next evening. That is going to be our actual day that we, as a ministry, do our Passover. That is going to be live streamed, probably bilingual. I'm not for sure. Most likely bilingual, and it will be from the building that we are in the process of getting ready to move into. However, if the moon was sighted on that other night, that puts it on the evening of the 22nd into the 23rd, and the 23rd being the day between evenings that you could eat the Passover. So this is how we're going to do it. Because there's a new experience coming. And what I mean by that is that there is an opportunity for another group of people to experience the Passover. I have not led an actual physical location in Grand Junction Passover in the past 8 years. And so as a result of that, this is something new. And as a result of that, we're going to kind of go with the flow on what would be the best day, and the best day is going to be that Wednesday. So as a result of that, on the evening of the 22nd into the evening of the 23rd is going to be kind of a personal Passover. We will, as individual families, eat the Passover. So am I going to lead a service on Passover? Yes, just not on the day that it would be expected. We're going to lead it on that Wednesday, because the congregation that I'm going into, that we're kind of bringing into this ministry, meets on Wednesday nights anyways in the evening. Well, with the sun going down later in the evening, we have an opportunity to consume food early enough in the afternoon that people are still able to come after work and be there and be present, and we will still be within the confines of those 2 evenings of what? Of my beholding the new moon. Now, I know all that's kind of confusing, and it has nothing to do with the message, but I wanted to kind of get that announcement out and help people understand that on from the evening of the 22nd until the evening of the 23rd is the official sighting of the new moon. It was that 1% crescent, which is almost impossible to see, but was seen by 2 people in our congregation. If you go and you start learning about magnitude and about light pollution and all that other stuff, it's almost impossible that moon would have been seen, but we have photographic evidence of it as well. So having said that, that's how we're going to proceed. We're going to have our personal Passover and not a corporate one. And then we're going to have the corporate one on the day that would actually be easier for everybody to get together. If Yahweh was a splitter of hairs concerning Passover and the judgment of not doing it on the correct day. And I'm not talking about replacing the feast. That's a different story. For those of you who are not Torah observant, this has nothing to do with you because you are already in error. Okay. But for those of you who are Torah observant and are sticklers about days, need to learn about procession because really technically there has been a change in when a 24-hour period begins and ends because of the advancement of the sun through the constellations at a higher rate than what the actual advancement was during Yeshua's time. Having said all that, what I'm trying to tell you is that the feast day is in the eye of the beholder. I stand by that. So for those of you who saw it on that first day, okay. For me, I saw it on that second day. I blew the shofar. We bore witness. And that is where it's going to stand as our congregation meeting. Okay. All right. So having said all that, that is just kind of a little bit of, I guess, just to kind of say, hey, look, we need to have a little bit more grace on the flexibility of when the day is. I mean, there's even been a presentation to me that actually we eat on the evening of the 14th. You know what? I don't really feel like I condemn congregations that do that. I never had heard of it before. Because in the end, you guys, you got to remember what happened with Hezekiah, right? So what happens with Hezekiah? Hezekiah finds out that they need to keep the Passover and institutes the Passover, and people start eating, and the priests come to him and say, these guys are unclean. And he's like, may the good Lord pardon. Why? Because it's about the feast itself being what? For the person. Remember, the Son of Man, Son of Adam, that would be you, who is not walking in the higher self. Remember, a Son of God is the higher self. A Son of Adam is what? They are doing the best they can, so to speak. But so the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. The Son of Man, right? And so in principle, we know that the Sabbath was not made for Adam, or I'm sorry, Adam was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for Adam. Right? And so in that principle, the Passover was not, or man was not made for the Passover. Passover was made for man. Okay? So ease up, let it go, and we will move forward and just have an amazing time. I have a feeling that post-Passover experience this year is going to be intense. It's going to be intense. So, having said that, that's enough that I'm going to say about that. And we will go ahead and get our minds wrapped around this week's message, which, man, I tell you, is going to be an intense one. So, I want to say, when we're talking about keeping the Sabbath, and that's a good transition, actually. Remember, the Sabbath is actually for you, not you for it. Do we honor it? Yes, absolutely we honor it. Why? Because it's a receiving of the gift from Abba that we have it in the first place. But let me say something. The priesthood worked on the Sabbath. In fact, it was one of their more busy days because not only were they doing the regular daily sacrifices, slaughters, but they were also teaching, right? They were teaching the people the difference between clean and unclean, holy and unholy. They were going through the Torah portions in some manner. We don't really know how, but we do know that they were teaching the Torah to the people. Now, it is important for you to understand that in that sense, the Sabbath for me is actually my busiest day of the week. And in principle, I am often at the end of the Sabbath drained and exhausted. And I can tell you that with all of the moving of the studio into the other location and with the new building that we're going to be getting and all of the other things that are happening with this ministry, there's been an element of exhaustion And I have literally come off of the week jumping into the Sabbath without having prepared myself in terms of showering and doing the mikvah and quieting my heart and changing the mood and changing the attitude and all of these things. And I can tell you, this is the first Sabbath where I have actually gotten to be able to come up for a breath. And it's interesting how all that comes about because, well, I have a special insight into coming up for a breath. When I was a kid, me and my dad went fishing. And there was a time where we were by the river and he was fishing and I was waiting. And there was this little shallow part. And I was walking this part. Pretty soon it got a little bit deeper, kind of up to my shins, and I was like, oh, wow. And then it was like turning a little bit pulling. And there was this island out in the middle of the river. And I was, oh, cool. I got to go to that island. It's kind of one of those things where that island cannot live without me, right? And so as I'm walking out there, pretty soon it's kind of up to above my knees, and I'm in jeans, right? So the river's really pulling against me. And as I'm taking steps, the river is pulling my feet away from the rocks, right? And so I'm trying to plant my weight, but as I'm taking steps, I'm starting to slide on the rocks, like almost like skating almost. And there was this moment in my mind where I realized I could not turn back. I could not go forward. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? And so I thought, well, I'm going to try to rush to the island. It was up to my hips and the river is just yanking on my pants. I can feel it, right? And my feet are sliding on the rocks on the bottom. There's no traction whatsoever. I'm trying to dig them in, whatever. I'm probably about 10 years old. Well, there was a point in time where I lost my balance and went feet up, head down into the water, and all of a sudden the river just took me. I was gone. And it was amazing because there were two things that were very, very apparent. Number one is there was no stopping it. I was flailing around trying to grab things. I thought I will swim upwards and try to get air, and I hit the bottom. And so I had no idea. I was totally disoriented. I had no idea what was up or down or anything like that. And I'm reaching around trying to grab at the rocks and everything else. And I'm flailing around like I'm drowning. I mean, I haven't gotten to that point, right? I hadn't taken a breath yet. Couldn't find my way up. I couldn't find my way down. I can't stop it taking me. And there's this moment when I thought to myself, at 10 years old, I'm going to die. And it's interesting because a 10-year-old's concept of death is going to be based on, how many gerbils and puppies and kittens died in his life, right? It's not going to be this light at the end of the tunnel and deep thoughts about what's going to happen when all that. It was just, yep, I'm not going to make it through this. And so there's a moment when I just stopped flailing and thought, you know what? I'm just going to ride the current, do the stream, and maybe something will happen. So I put my hands to my side and I let the current take me. And right as I did, I mean, like, it was almost like put your hands to your side and you're going to let it take you. And boom, this hand reaches in and yanks me out of the water. My dad had ran down the dike and gotten to the other end and actually was able to reach in and pull me out of the water. To this day, I can tell you my body gets all tingly and I start having these anxiety, panic type of feelings when I tell that story, because there was that moment when I thought my head was getting above water and I was going down deeper into the river. Well, this is a deep concept because then all of a sudden now we're talking about what does it mean to get your head above water? I mean, it's not about up, right? Well, anyways, the reason I bring this up, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the message per se, but just to say that this Sabbath feels special. And I think one of the reasons it does is I took a moment last night and I did my mikvah and I said, I need to be prepared for tomorrow and I'm not going to go in there half cocked because this message is a little bit crazy. But what I wanted to share with you is kind of the experience of doing Sabbath versus taking Sabbath. And the whole idea is I've run into Sabbath half cocked. Don't get me wrong. If I stand up here, shut my mouth, and let God speak, He's going to speak. Okay. So I don't necessarily need to do a whole lot. In fact, I can be in a pretty bad place and still do the service because it's me getting out of the way, and that's not hard to do, right? It's just me shutting up and letting Him speak. Well, this week obviously is no exception, except that I kind of feel like I am experiencing more energy, more motivation to speak today than I have in the past. And I can tell you the last two messages have been huge, right? Okay, so I know that today was a lot of introductions and a lot of extra stuff, but I just kind of want to share with you guys the experience of taking that moment to intentionally keep Shabbat, right? Which can be lost for a rabbi in the fact that this is the day when I literally spend all day speaking, 2 to 3 hours on my feet and 2 to 3 hours sitting talking, right? So it's important for us teachers to remember that what we teach needs to kind of apply to us as well, self-care, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so having said that, when I began this journey, and what am I talking about this journey? I'm talking about when I'm a Protestant Calvinist Christian sitting on the sidelines on Sunday afternoon, having eliminated NASCAR, football, and soccer out of my life, to sit and actually read the scripture and sit down and rest. And Yahweh, the intensification of all power in the universe, says Sabbath. There's that moment when it was end of everything I understood about scripture. It was the end of everything that seemed logical. It was the end of everything that calculated as a Christian for me in the reality of my God. And I was touched. So since I began this journey, now you understand what journey, I had a moment where I was studying with the Orthodox Jews, and there was this. So I would pray with them, right? And I would get into the siddur and say the prayers with them. I know them very well, and there is a part in there where it says, "Bless the Lord who is blessed," and then there's a response to it that is, "Blessed is the Lord, Amen," from the congregation. Now, that's not in every siddur, and I may have twisted that around a little bit, but the principle is that this week, while I was thinking about my beginnings in that Orthodox congregation, consequently, that Orthodox congregation was the beginning of my understanding of what it meant to be a rabbi, and actually did a lot of studies in Talmud, a lot of learning and understanding of being an Orthodox Jew, enough that when Passover came along, the leader wasn't available, and they actually asked me, a believer in Christ, a Christian, to lead their Passover for them in that synagogue. Well, anyways, the point why I bring this up is because since I began this journey, and I remember those words back in my time spending with them of being in Orthodox Judaism, having nothing to do with Christianity, nothing to do with my Messiah. And here they have this statement in their siddur, "Bless the Lord who is blessed." So I was thinking about it the other day, and I was going, I was just kind of going through the Siddur in my brain. That's all that was happening. I was reading the Siddur in my brain while I was sitting in a parking lot. And I'm not quite sure I remember why I was getting into the Siddur. I think I was thinking about the mourner's Kiddush or something like that. And there was just this moment where it was like, how in the world is he blessed? So, talk about trying to understand something. Because why? Because the American Christian says God bless you when somebody sneezes. The American Christian says bless Lord bless me, whatever. The American Christian says, I am blessed, right? I don't know. So what's that one? Blessed and highly favored. I remember that one. I used to say it too. Blessed and highly favored in what? I know. Okay. So that one got a little bit weird for me. But anyways, the point is what is blessing? And I'm sitting there in the car and I'm going, is this car blessing? Nice car, right? Is me taking a breath a blessing? Where do I draw the line on blessing? And you guys know that I have taught you in the past when it says, "Behold, I set before you a blessing and a curse, life and death. Choose life that you might live." I call heaven and earth as witness that I set this before you, right? Choose life that you might live, right? Okay. So the blessing part, behold, I set before you blessing, in my mind, is this more than the sun shining on the just and the unjust. Remember, you're going to be the head and not the tail. You're going to be what? Blessed in your uh your kneading bowls, your children, your crops, your servants, etc. Enemy will come at you one way and flee from you five ways. Something extra, right? But I'm the one who's attaching blessing to that. It doesn't actually say you would be that you would be elite in those things. I'm the one who's saying if the sun shines on the just and the unjust, then obviously there has to be something extra. If you're going to be the head and not the tail, then there has to be tails. And those tails get the sun and the rain, right? Their crops still come up. There's tails. And those tails are not insignificant in value, but they are definitely the lesser. They are in a state of reception, and some of that reception is instruction. Remember, provision, protection, and instruction. And so I'm going, oh, wow, this is getting big really fast, because all of a sudden I'm going, is that what blessing is? So this is going to come and this is going to hit hard and it's going to be heavy, because I'm going to do my toe stepping again, and I'm about to take your Christianese and I'm about to turn it upside down. And by the time we're done with this discussion, you are going to understand blessing a lot different than you ever did, because when it started to really process in my brain, I was like, oh boy, that's the message for Saturday. I didn't even really get that much of a confirmation until right before, and it was like, oh, okay. So what we're going to do here, I feel like the best thing that we can do is go to the Beatitudes. And the reason I say we should go to the Beatitudes is because there is a premise or principle that Yeshua is speaking to who? To the world in the Sermon on the Mount. How do we know that? Because they did not recognize him as Messiah. Therefore, they were not believers in what? The new covenant, etc. They remember Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. Abraham's new covenant believer. David, take not thy salvation, take not the joy of the salvation, restore unto me the joy of my salvation, take not the Holy Spirit from me. According to most Christian theologians, you can't have the Holy Spirit until you have Christ. And then we get into, how is Noah blameless? How can Abimelech of Gerar claim that he has a righteous nation, et cetera, righteousness is determined by what? The issue is merit. It's just we're kind of gonna go backwards in time instead of forwards in time with his um death, burial, and resurrection. So here's my point. He's speaking to a people who do not yet know who he is, and he begins these Beatitudes. So why would that be important? I'll tell you why. Because then what can we do? We can be all inclusive. We don't have to have people believing in Christ. We do not have to have people being obedient to Torah. We do not have to have people believing in God in order for those blessings that are said in the Beatitudes to apply. Okay? Okay. So that being the case, let's jump into that. And of course, that's going to be in Matthew. And so we're just going to go ahead and go to Matthew chapter 5. Okay. And we'll just I'm going to say that we're going to do this out of the New King James version of the Bible. Well, let's see. I don't want to do a side by side. We'll just do New King James version of the Bible. And one of the reasons I'm going to do that is because I don't want the these and thous, but I do want what James Strong concorded the Bible to. I want the King James, right? Okay. So let's see. What do we need to do here? I need to share my screen for one. And then I also, let's see. All right. Having a moment of technical difficulties here. There we go. Okay. So, and seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain. And when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when they revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil things against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Okay. So what we're going to do is just jump into verse 3 in the interlinear on the Blue Letter Bible app, and we are going to go to this word blessed, right? Blessed. It's going to be Strong's G3107. Now, there's a number of ways we can get back to the Hebrew, and I will show you that in a minute, but I want you to notice that there is not a route to follow. So this is, let's go ahead and listen to this real quick.
Strong's G3107, Makarios. Makarios.
So Makarios, or Makarios, is basically coming from the thought process of Makar, which basically means to supremely blessed, to be supremely blessed, and by extension to be fortunate or well off, but it's a poetic statement. Okay. All right. So in the Hebrew, if we jump down here to the Thayers, in the Hebrew, we are encountering this word ashrei, right? From the word asher. Okay. But how many people know that there is actually another word? And what I'm going to do here is concordance results shown for the New King James Version of the Bible. We're going to jump from, see this MGNT, which is the majority Greek New Testament. Okay. We're going to jump to the LXX. That's the Septuagint. And we're going to go look at what is being used here. So it says, Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. So she called his name Asher. Okay. So we're going to jump over there. And it says, I am happy, the daughters will call me blessed. So let's see what we see in the Hebrew here. So it says, I am, basically, it says that she is blessed right here. Okay. Or in blessing, right? Um, but and here's the interesting thing about this is that what she's saying here is that she has obtained good fortune. Okay, let's take a look at that. Happiness, right? Happiness used one time, and this is of course the one time, right? But we also see that this is coming from ashar, which is what? To go straight, to walk, to go on, advance, or make progress. Okay. So the root of this is actually becoming, a little bit different thought process than blessed. So let's talk about that for a minute. So we have this idea of blessing being fortunate, right? If you say, "Oh, you're blessed," or you say, "God bless you," asking for good fortune, right? I mean, that's the premise, right? Okay, so what we need to do then is we need to kind of establish what is the difference between blessing, stating a blessing, and being blessed, right? So the first thing we need to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to put up on the board this share. And we're going to do that so that we can kind of record where we're at with stuff. So jumping over into our whiteboard, we're going to go ahead and let's see here. I'm going to do that one, and let's do that one, and let's do that one. Let's try that. Okay. So we're going to go Aleph, right? We will go Sheen. I apologize for my Hebrew. And there we go. Okay. And so that we're documenting that. We're just going to leave that for now and jump back over into our tablet. And now to go straight, walk on, advance, or make progress. So we need to study that one out. But is this the concept of blessing somebody or calling somebody blessed or stating that they are a blessing, right? The answer to that question, of course, is obviously no. So just for a minute, let's talk about what, in terms of thought process, the actual principle of stating a blessing, how that works in the Torah. Is there a statement or is there an explanation of a statement of a blessing? Well, the only one that I could find or think of, and doesn't mean there isn't more, is the blessing of Isaac over Jacob. And the verse that came to me that day when I was sitting in the car is, does there not yet still exist a blessing for me? This is Esau asking Isaac to bless him. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump into that really quick. We'll just go over to what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a search. Okay. So I'm just going to type in this word blessing. And then we will go ahead and jump over to Genesis 12:2, right? I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. Let's see if that's that same. And it says, and you shall be a blessing. Let's see if that's that same premise. Do we get our word a share here? Let's go. Okay. Thee I will bless. Let's go to that. Oh, here we go. We have a different word. This is barach, which means to bless or kneel. And we're going to get to that. All right. So the premise is that we have this word blessing, and it is barach, right? So we'll go ahead and we'll put that up on the board real quick. And we'll just kind of do a word comparison between the two. And of course, this is going to be the final kaf, right? And of course, in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, we do not have finals, but that's fine. All right. So now jumping back over into this, let's go to that and see if that's the same thing, blessing. And we will see the one about Isaac. Let's see. I'm sorry, Esau. So I'm going to say that's the one we want to get right there. And Esau said, is he not rightly called named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now look, he has taken my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? So let's go see what that is. Have you not reserved a blessing for me? And again, it is going to be a barakah, and it is from the word barak. So we're in good territory here. So here's the question. And it's obviously an important one, is when Yeshua says, blessed are those, is this word barach the word being used, or is it asher? Now, one of the things I want you to think about is Yeshua did not speak Greek to the Jews. Okay, that would have been extraordinarily offensive. And not only that, but probably would have gotten him in more trouble than what he already was in for his radical beliefs, right? So when he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, he either said barach or he said asher. Okay, and that's important here. Now, here's the relevance. One seems to mean happiness in the sense of straightness. We'll get to that. And another seems to mean to kneel and has to do with, of course, we've learned this in the past, a filling of the palms. Okay. So obviously we've already explored Barak a number of times, but we're going to kind of look at something a little bit different here. And that is, what actually is a blessing? Well, again, the only place I could really find where there's a statement of a blessing and that, or there's a statement and that's called a blessing, is in the patriarchs, in Isaac to Jacob and in Jacob to Joseph. Those are our 2 areas. So let's go to Joseph first. And that's going to be in Genesis chapter 48. Bereshit 48. And very specifically, we are going to go to verse 15. And he blessed. Let's double check our word. There it is. And he blessed. Okay. And he blessed Joseph and said, God, for whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, walked, the God who has fed me all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. Let's take a look at that. Let's see what bless is here. Okay. And he says, there it is. So we've got Barak. So is this the same as Asher? Evidently not, right? Okay. And so bless the lads. let my name be named upon them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Now Joseph saw that his father had laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, and it displeased him. He took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." Ah, we have a clue to the blessing that it has something to do with the firstborn, right? That is in this context. And so, in that sense, as we're looking at this, then we can start to understand that this blessing that is stated has something to do with the firstborn. Okay. So then obviously when we go back to that, when we go back to Genesis 27 and we look at where this blessing has occurred, we can actually go back and see what the blessing was for Jacob. Verse 27. So this is 27. And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his clothing and blessed him and said, "Surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field, which Yahweh has blessed." Let's see if that word blessed is actually. There we go. Barak. Okay. So we're not talking about the share version of this. Then he says, "There may therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you." Okay, let's take a look at that. Let peoples serve you. Right? Okay. And then let what? Let nations bow down to you. Let's see what that is. That is going to be the word leom. Let's see, a people or nation. Okay. So this is again this kind of this idea of giving dominion, as it were, to his son. Now look at this. Let your mother's son bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. Let's take a look at that. Okay. Blessed. Again, barach. Okay. Barach. All right. So, let's talk about this for a minute. Two things that we have here. We have a dynamic or shiftable birthright, but that birthright is still containing the blessing. Okay? The blessing. Yeshua says, blessed are the meek, right? For they shall inherit the earth. Not the same word, right? We're looking at that being more adaptable as a share. And why? Because of the Septuagint. Let's talk a minute about the Septuagint. Short version, 72 elders of the nation of Israel, including, of the nation of Judah, representing 12 tribes, representing elders from each of the 12 tribes, but that's virtually impossible because there was no identification or identifiable 12 tribes anymore, but those were supposed to represent those 12 tribes in an approval to Ptolemy Philadelphia to have Torah translated from Hebrew into Greek. Well, that Koine Greek is the same Greek that the New Testament is written in. I should say, is translated to. Okay. So the reason why this is important is because then what we can do is we can reverse engineer words. We can look at a word in the Greek and we can take it back into the Hebrew and find it in the Tanakh or in the Torah in the Old Testament. What? See what the Hebrew word is, and then we can even reverse engineer it more and take that Greek word all the way back to the pictographs, which what? Tell a story about a pictographic story about a Hebrew word. Okay. So having said that, we have our work cut out for us. We need to what? We need to identify what this is in the ancient Hebrew, and we need to identify what that is in the ancient Hebrew. And of course, you guys remember, we've already kind of studied this one out, right? The whole kneeling thing about filling the palm. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump into that. So the first thing that we need to do, obviously, is get us that Strong's concordance number for that word asher, and then take it back into the Hebrew. So that's real simple, right? We can just go in and we can type in the word blessing again in the search. And we can specifically pull up the part where Leah names her son. Did we lose it? I think we lost it. Okay. Oh, I know. That's what I did wrong. Okay, there we go. Now we can do that. And so do you guys see how it's important for keywords to be used correctly when you're doing searches? It can really get out of hand when you use a keyword incorrectly. You may not find the scripture that you're looking for. That's not it. So when we're okay, I still don't see Leia here. Let me see. Okay, let me go back into this Matthew scripture. You know what? I think one of the reasons why I'm getting hung up here is because what we need to do is we need to go back and reverse engineer this the way I had said earlier. So here we are in Matthew chapter 5, right? In Matthew chapter 5, we're just going to go ahead and use the meek because almost everybody knows, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. I'm going to go back and we're going to get that word, which is going to be this Greek word right here, right? And then in the Thayers, that's going to take us back to this Ashri, right? And then we go to first usage on the root, right? And we see Leah using it for the name Asher, right? She called his name Asher. So then when we jump into that part there in Genesis 30:13, don't know why I couldn't find that earlier. In Genesis 30:13, when we jump into that part, we are going to then have our too many features on this thing. Okay, Genesis 30:13. We're going to have our word, and we can go get our Strong's Concordance number off of that. Right, Asher, bam, right there. Okay, so you guys see that's how we do that. Then we go, and I'm just gonna copy this this Strong's Concordance number right here. And and then take it over into the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible, paste the number in, and then remove the H, because obviously we're only dealing with the Hebrew. And now what we can do is actually find out what our word is here in terms, okay. Something happened there. So I think I actually didn't get the Strong's Concordance number correct. Okay, down, 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 down. Still looking for it. Huh. Okay. So I'm not quite sure why we're encountering that problem with and not having the Strong's Concordance number in here. Let me try one more time here. Okay. So what I'm going to do instead is just switch over to Hebrew, and I'm going to type in Asher. There we go. Asher. Okay. Here we go. I'm not quite sure why that didn't bring up the Strong's Concordance number to begin with, but okay, so we are here. So as you can see, this is a child root, right? What is the meaning behind a child root? Well, basically, it just means that you can find the parent root easier because it contains a yod, a hey, of aleph, or a doubled last letter. In this case, it's the aleph. So we can actually go back here. Huge pictographic definition. But here we go. This is shin resh. And the concrete word is straight, right? That's going to be the concrete word there. But let's look at the pictographic definition. The pictograph shin is a picture of teeth representing pressure. The resh is a picture of the head representing the top or beginning. Combine these mean press the beginning. Ropes and cords were usually made of bark strips, such as from the cedar or from the sinew tendon of a animal. The rope is made by twisting two fibers together. A single fiber is attached to a fixed point, or the top, and the two ends of the fiber are brought together. One fiber is twisted in a clockwise direction and wrapped over the other fiber in a counterclockwise direction. The second fiber is then twisted in a clockwise direction and then wrapped around the first fiber in a counterclockwise direction. The process is repeated through the length of the rope. The twisting of the fibers in the opposite directions causes the fibers to lock or press into each other, making a stronger rope. The rope is used to tightly secure or support something, such as a load to a cart or the poles of a tent. So the shin resh is generally the word for sinews, okay? But we also have it as the umbilical cord, right? And we have it as it could be the bracelet, right? A cord around the wrist. We have the idea of juice as in being loosened from a fruit, which doesn't necessarily jive with the idea of being tightened together. But then we've got Sheen Noon was a wall as an armor around the city, something that's tightened around the city. And then Sheen Yod Kresh Yod Vav Nun, or Shir Yon. Shir Yon is a harness, an armor made of tightly wound cord or leather. Then we have Shin Resh Resh. Sinews were used for making cords and twisting them together, right? So same principle, but then we have Shin Resh Resh as an abstract of an enemy as one who is to be tied up or bound, right? Then we get into Aleph Shin Resh, a cord pulled tight is straight. And then Ashar is happy, enjoying well-being and contentment. One who's happy is one whose life is lived straightly. Okay. Before we look at any of the others, which we don't necessarily need to do, obviously, again, we are getting into this idea of a concrete word of an abstract of concrete word, and then an abstract of that word. So we already have this principle of straightness being the cord that's already been braided. Remember, with the pictograph itself is telling the story of the braiding. It's sinew, right? Or the pieces of a cord being locked together by the counterclockwise and clockwise twisting. That makes a straight cord. And that straight cord is then an abstract for happiness, because when a person's life is walked in a straight path, way abstract, then they're happy. Meaning what? Well, interestingly enough, what is the word for Torah? To shoot something straight or throw the finger in a straight line. Instruction is the idiomatic concept of the finger being thrown in a certain way. And so now what we have straight path being Torah. Happy is the person who actually walks the Torah. And where do we see that? We see that in Psalm 119. Over and over and over, a mention of the word Torah and the idea of walking a straight path. But that's not enough, is it? Because Yeshua says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." And so obviously he is giving this idea that there is a contentment or happiness in doing the right thing. Right? There's a contentment and happiness in doing the right thing, not the wrong thing. That may have a temporary fulfillment of, it's a horrible word, that might have a temporary feeling of contentment and happiness, but it doesn't last, right? Because there's an element of a deficit present. Okay. We're not gonna jump any further into the Shin Resh. We're just gonna kind of make some notes here real quick to kind of keep track of everything that we've got going on. So obviously, let's start by marking our parent root and naming it what? The sinew. Let's just call it sinew. And in the sense of it being something that makes a rope, right? I spelled sinew wrong. It is the principle of creating a stronger tensile strength fiber to retain loads or support the tent, right? Okay, and our olive then is the thing that is augmenting the rest, and that turns it into happy, right? In the sense of being straight. In the sense of being straight or walking a straight path. Okay. So that takes care of that side. And that side seems to be more about obedience and about receiving the blessing. So obviously, one of the ones that comes into my mind is the question is, okay, if that's the case, then let's go look at our actual verse that says, I call heaven and earth as witness against you that I set before you, right? That's going to be in Deuteronomy 30. So let's go ahead and jump over there real quick. Deuteronomy 30. And specifically, we are going to be looking at, I believe it is verse 14. No. Um, yeah, 19. All right, here we go. I call heaven and earth as witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life that both you and your descendants may live. Let's see what that word blessing is there. It is not a share, which is interesting because of what we are about to get into. Okay, so obviously, what do we have going on here? We have two different words being translated as the same thing in English based upon a sentiment already present concerning the word. So the American Christian comes along and a person sneezes and they say, God bless you. What does that mean to a Hebrew? Well, let's start at the beginning. The first thing that a Hebrew is going to go ask is, why are you saying God bless you when I sneeze? It doesn't make any sense, right? There's no commandment in Torah, there's no experience of Torah that seems to indicate that you are supposed to do that, right? So then the next thing they're going to go, okay, where did that come from? What is that? Because obviously I teach you to be diligent in this. I teach you to what? Go find out. So then the next question is where does it come from? Well, there's a few different sources that you could probably use to find that out. But one of the good ones that in my opinion, explains it really well is fossilized customs. However, that's not where I learned it. Okay, so Lou White's fossilized customs will flat out tell you it's a pagan practice, blah, blah, blah. I actually learned it from the book Every Man's Talmud, which is a nice little concise summary of the Talmud, which is a 27 volume, probably about that long, with books that thick. Little summed up to in a book that thick and about that big. And it says flat out in there that Jews do not say God bless you because it is a pagan practice. And it's a practice of the nations, is what what it says in it. And it explains that it's because the nations believed that if they didn't say bless you, that a demon could inhabit that person's body while they're sneezing because they don't have their faculties at that moment. Okay, so that's kind of repeated in every man's Talmud, but you get my point. So the American Christian comes along and says, God bless you, and that's it. So obviously, there's two things right off the bat that we run into. The first one is which blessing, right? Are we talking about barach or are we talking about asher? So guys sneeze, you say, God bless you. Which one, right? So that would be my first question. Are you asking God to bless me because of my straight path, right? In other words, are you asking for God to make me content in my straight path? Or are you asking this other thing, which we're going to get into in a minute? Okay. So in the process, I think it's important that we start to try to understand what a beracha is. Okay. So what have we determined so far? We've determined that it is the firstborn. It has something to do with the firstborn. We have determined that when Joseph saw Jacob speak over the children and his hands were crossed, and he tried to correct him and say, no, you need to bless you need to bless the firstborn. What is this blessing? Where did it come from? What is it? How does it work? Isaac says, hey, I'm about to die. Let me bless you. Okay. Okay. So obviously, we're going to kind of be a little bit redundant here when we go back and look at our word barak in the actual Hebrew. Okay. The way we're going to do that, we're just going to go right from our verse here. I call heaven and earth as witness today against you that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life that both you and your descendants may live. Okay, so now jumping over into the Hebrew, and he says, behold, I have set before you life and death, a blessing and curse. There's our baracha in the Hebrew. Okay, and it's used 69 times, 69 times in the Strong's in the King James Version of the Bible. It's translated 61 times. So of those 69, it's translated 61 times as blessing, 3 times as blessed, 1 time as liberal. We'll leave that one alone. And 1 time as pools. Well, I would be curious about the pools myself, but we're going to leave that alone. Okay, so having said that, obviously now we get into the concept of what's our first usage, and of course our first usage is Genesis 12:2, where Yahweh says, "You shall be a blessing," right? I will bless you, and you shall be a blessing. So let's take a look at that one first. In Genesis 12:2, right? That's one I want to look at for sure when we're dealing with this. So Genesis 12:2 says, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And look at this. In you all the families of earth shall be blessed does not use asher. It uses God. So what do we understand? This is not in you all the families of the earth will be content because you're getting what you want, right? Let's talk about that for just a moment real quick before we start to create a contrast between these two. Contentment in the eye of the beholder is going to be the opposite of discontent. Discontent is where we experience an incongruity that psychologically makes us uncomfortable and we have to come to some sort of resolution in the cognitive dissonance make us feel comfortable again and therefore okay with the circumstance by which we have become discontent. In other words, it's a psychological discomfort, something that our brain does not find acceptable, and we have to arrive at some sort of solution to get us to a point where we find it acceptable. Same principle of discomfort in a lot of ways. Pain is a discomfort, right? Being cold is a discomfort. It can be a relief, but it's a discomfort, right? Being too hot is a discomfort, right? You know, your best friend tickling you, and that can become a discomfort, right? So the principle is that anything that asserts itself as something that would cause you to feel uncomfortable, and by uncomfortable, I mean where your brain does not accept the circumstances. Okay? So we understand asher to be that, to be content, and I'm going to push a little bit later to be a clear conscience. We're going to get to that. But that's our contrast because we know barak means something else. We're going to get to that, and it's going to be very, very important. So let's start by getting into this word blessed. We're going to say, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. We're going to go ahead and look in the Hebrew here, and we're going to get the Strong's Concordance number H1288. H1288. And you guys will see right away, we have studied this before. We have looked at this word before. However, there is something more to be discussed concerning it. And I think that is going to be important here in a minute. Okay, so 1288, of course, then we can pull that up, and here we are. And of course, yes, it's highlighted. Why? Because we've already been through this. All right, so then let's go back to our parent root to identify where we're at with this. So here we are. Bet Resh. Bet Resh is our parent root, and it is the idea of a knee, right? So we have kneel as our action. We have knee as our concrete, and of course covenant as our abstract. The pictograph bait is a picture of a tent, but also represents the family which resides inside the tent. The Cheresh is a picture of the head. Combine these mean family of heads. Family of heads. Did it click yet? That a blessing is the jurisdictional authority given to the firstborn from the Father. That it is the inheritance, but it is the authority of the inheritance. Remember, he says the nations, he gave it the dew of heaven. And here's what I want you to think about. Esau comes to Isaac and he's like, do you still have a blessing for me? And he goes, man, dude, I gave him the dew of heaven. Okay, just for a moment, let's just single Isaac out and what we know about him. Okay, he's the promised son, right? Yeah, Yahweh comes to him in Vayira and says, in a year, you're going to have a kid, right? He's the promised son. Through Isaac shall your name be called, not Ishmael, right? We don't see Ishmael become the one of the patriarchs. And in that process, then we have Isaac what? We have Isaac growing up and becoming a man and taking his wife Rebecca. And what stories do we have about Isaac? Well, there's only a few. Digging of wells, his interaction with Abimelech of Gerar, the king of the Philistines, and also the deception, and this blessing between Jacob and Esau, and that's it. That's all we know about Isaac, and yet he has what? The authority of the dew of heaven. Don't even know what that is. And to be honest with you, I think that would be a very interesting midrash. But the premise is that he has it, and he tells Esau, man, I gave him that. Meaning what? The blessing was the covenant of inheritance. The blessing was the covenant of inheritance. Does it mean to take a knee? Yes, absolutely. Let's go there, right? Let's go there. So we go over to Barak, right? The bending at the knee to drink from a pond or to present a gift. Present a gift. So this is what? It's a bestowal. A blessing is a bestowal of authority and stewardship. Okay? So as soon as a blessing is said over someone, they now have the authority. So when we're dealing with the firstborn status, we are dealing with the inheritance, right? We're dealing with the inheritance. Yahweh gave an inheritance to Jacob gave in the name of Yahweh inheritance to Joseph from the land that he took, right? From the land that Jacob acquired. And the part that's important here is that then he blesses Joseph's sons, bringing them into a state of adoption. That's another important element we won't get into today, but he brings them into a state of adoption, and then he blesses them, but he blesses what? He blesses the wrong one because of the firstborn status. Joseph tries to correct him, and he says, no, this is how I'm going to do it, and that's just how it is. That is all about inheritance. Romans chapter 8 says we are what? Heirs with Christ. We are heirs. We have an inheritance. Most people would believe that would be what happens after you die, right? Most people would believe that you are actually storing up for yourself treasures in heaven that you'll receive after you die. That if you're good now, later on you'll get blessed. That's not how Torah works. Obedience, right, does not bring the birthright. Faith brings the birthright. Remember, it is not the bloodline children of Abraham who become Israel. And it's not the bloodline children of Isaac who become Israel. And it's not the bloodline children of Jacob who became Israel. That's what it says. Not all Israel is Israel who is in the flesh, but it is the children of the promise who become the sons of God. Sons of God, B'nai Elohim. And so in premise, then we would say, well, if that's the case, then we understand that faith brings the birthright. What is faith? It is an acceptance or belief, right, of a promise. And it is an activation of that promise through action. And that action would be something that would be what? It would require faith. It's a crisis of belief. Okay, so there are two reasons why that's important. The first one being what? That this has something to do with an adoption and authority. And the other is that it has something to do with stewardship and property. Property, okay? Which gets us into the concept of abundance, which gets us into a share, the reward of walking a straight path, as it were, right? The obedience thereof as a result of a clear conscience. So let's start with some merit, right? So Paul is making an argument about the idea that a Gentile can be blessed by God without having been circumcised. So he's in Romans, and he's talking about Abraham, and he says, what has our father Abraham found then? Right? And he asks that question. He says, look, of all the people on earth, Abraham is one who is definitely merited to have received blessing. Was it the result of obedience, or was that blessing a sovereign action? Well, now we can understand what he's saying when he was saying that. He was saying, did Abraham have to get circumcised in order to accept the stewardship of the promised land? And the answer to the question was no. Yahweh blessed him before then, right? So when we say merit, and we say that faith brings the birthright, but obedience brings the blessing, we have a tendency to think about blessing in terms of reward, and we have a tendency to think about blessing in terms of abundance, and therefore what? Luxurious living, eliteness, etc. When the truth is that what is actually being communicated has something to do with authority. And that's where we have kind of blown this. But you watch what's about to happen here. I mean, this is about to get intense because what you got to ask yourself is I share the right word that's being used here? Well, there's a couple ways we can find that out. And when I'm saying a share, I'm talking about that word, mikiras, in the Greek majority Greek New Testament. Okay. So the first thing we have to do is we have to kind of come to an acceptance that this idea of filling the palm, right? Let's just take a look at that real quick. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so that adopted root, bet resh kaf, the bending at the knee to drink from a pond or to present a gift. And what's related is as a filling with a gift with the letter kaf, the full meaning being to fill the palm, right? And you take a knee or bend the knee in homage or to drink water, and in the intensive to pay respect in the sense of kneeling before another. But remember, it has to do with filling of the palm. And a barakah is a present or gift given to another in respect as if on bended knee. Also, a pool of water or a place where one kneels down to drink from. Okay, avrach, avrach. I'm sorry, avrek, bend the knee, bending down as a sign of respect to another. And then we're going to let that, we're going to go ahead and let it go from here. We're not going to get into that again because we just went through this a week ago or 2 weeks ago when we looked up the word, when we looked up the word for creation and a number of other things. Okay, so now what we need to do here is we need to start to kind of look at the aspects of the word blessing. So the way we're going to do that is, remember I told you that generally speaking, American Christianity has established that a blessing is when someone has received something more than what they deserve per se, or at least has received a reward for their obedience. Of course, we have, hey, how are you? And I'm blessed and highly favored, and don't even know what they're talking about. Okay. Person sneezes, they say, God bless you, and they have no idea what they're saying. So then what we need to do is kind of establish an understanding of what all we have encountered here. Well, the first thing is obviously the taking of a knee to fill the palm with a gift. What gift? The inheritance. What is an inheritance? It is a jurisdictional authority given to the firstborn to continue what? To continue the family business, the family well-being, and the legacy of clan, right? So the whole idea is that as the clan leaders started to age and get into a place where they could no longer go out to war, then the firstborn takes the banner and takes the staff to represent the clan, and they're the ones who will go out to war. Well, in that process, they receive all of the responsibility of the property to do what? To protect. They receive all the responsibility of the family business in order to what? Provide. And they receive the wisdom from the father of the leader of the clan to what? To instruction or give jurisdictional responsibility to a lesser. Now, the reason why this is so relevant is because number one, it's going to go back into the garden, but also it's going to go into that statement, through you will all of the families of the earth be blessed. So now, what if we were then to go and explore Deuteronomy 28? And the reason for that is because the word blessing is used over and over and over again with a contingency. A contingency. Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim, to observe carefully all his commandments which I command you today, that Yahweh your Elohim will set you high above the nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you, because you obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim. So what do we have here? We have the commandments that Moses was giving to them that day were the voice of Yahweh. That's stated there. It's stated that there's an if-then process. Um, there's a conditional aspect added to this statement. And that conditional aspect is if that condition is not met, then this will not occur. But if it is met, this will occur, and that was obedience to observe carefully all his commandments, which I command you today, right? But this is what I want you to think about. He says, all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you. Okay, so then let's take a look at what we've got here. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, the produce of your ground, and the increase of your herds, the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall be you when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. Yahweh will cause your enemies to rise against you, to be defeated before your face. They shall come out against you one way and flee from you 7 ways. Yahweh will command the blessing on you in your storehouses and all to which you set your hand. He will bless you in the land which Yahweh your Elohim has given you. Yahweh will establish you as a holy people to himself, just as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim and walk in his ways. Well, there's some our share stuff, right? Then all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of Yahweh, and they shall be afraid of you. Oh, that's interesting. And Yahweh will grant you plenty of goods in the fruit of your body, in the increase of your livestock, in the produce of your ground, in the land of which Yahweh swore to your fathers to give you. Yahweh will open to you his good treasure, the heavens, to give the rain to your land in its season, and bless all the work of your hand. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And Yahweh will make you the head and not the tail. You shall be above only and not beneath. If you heed the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim, which I command you today, and are careful to observe them, so you shall not turn aside from any of the words which I command you this day, to the right or to the left, to go after other gods, to serve them. Okay. Now, that was a lot of stuff, right? So obviously you could say blessed would be your kneading bowl, right? Okay, so let's go back to that thought process there. Blessed shall be your kneading bowl. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Prosperous shall be your basket and kneading bowl. Right? That seems to be the thought process here. But what do we know about Beracha? That it is an inheritance, a jurisdictional authority given to what? A firstborn. So now when we take that and apply that filter over the top of this, blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. And let's just double check that. Let's just double check this basket and kneading bowl and make sure we're still dealing with Beracha. And of course, we are, right? To bless or to kneel. Okay. All right. And in the and so when we're talking about this, now we understand that in some weird way or form, there shall be an authoritative element over your basket and kneading bowl. An authoritative element beyond, because remember in the past I've said the way that you know that you're blessed is when you have more than what those who are the just and the unjust have. The sun shine on them and the rain fall on them, and seed time and harvest, cold and heat, guaranteed by the rainbow, which represents covenant. And so if the rainbow is representing covenant to the nations of the earth, not just the people of God, not just the family of Israel, not just the clan of Israel, whose clan leader is Yahweh Elohim, and whose firstborn representation is Yeshua HaMashiach, and we are joint heirs with him, then we understand that the blessing is actually the authority. So, in a weird sort of way, what we have is your basket will be an authority. Your kneading bowl will be an authority. Now, this is where it gets crazy because then we start to get into what does that mean? That your basket would be an authority or kneading bowl. Well, that's probably going to be reserved for Midrash. But one of the things that I want to kind of bring forward is he says, if you will walk in his ways. Remember, walking the straight path creates contentment, and contentment is the opposite of discontent, which is a cognitive dissonance as a result of discomfort, which seems to be present as a result of not being obedient. But we do need to ask a question, because when Moses says, behold, I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you. Holy smokes, if you guys knew what that meant. But I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you. Behold, I set before you life and death. Let's talk a minute about that. Remember, death is not the expiration of the body, but instead an interruption of chaos and the hyphen in between. So death for a Hebrew was not the expiration of the body, but everything that he experienced in his life until that expiration. So a point A and a point B in an otherwise chaotic, eternal, undefined, without form realm. So now coming into form, coming into definition, is the word for death. It comes in the sense ability of an empty belly. Whereas I is the life and therefore the full belly, therefore being hungry equated to death. And that's why Jews and Hebrews fasted to simulate death in order to have the resurrection power activate within them. But in that same breath, we understand that the equated to that is the blessing and a curse. Behold, I set before you life and death, a blessing and a curse. Choose life that you may live, right? So choose a full belly that you may live. And that somehow was equated to the blessing. But the one that we don't understand, don't know anything about, have never studied out before, never talked about, is the word curse. So jumping from Deuteronomy 28, verse 5, down to Deuteronomy 28, verse 15, we have this. But it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim, what's that? Torah, to observe carefully all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you today, that all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. And we're going to get to that overtaking part. But right now, we're going to jump in over here. And what we're going to do is look at the word curse. And it is the word kalala. Kalala. We'll listen to that real quick.
Strong's H, 7045. Kelala. Kelala.
Okay. And it's coming from the root word kalal, vilification or execration. Execration. All right. Coming from the root word kalal, well, what do we have here? We have a doubled last letter, so that's a child root. And so we can go and we can just jump in and go find Kof Lamed. We're not going to do that because it's a long journey through the electronic version of the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible. If we have just the pages, we can real quick look that up. But to be slight, to be swift, to be trifling, to be of little account, to be light. Okay. And so jumping into and actually, you know what? Let's document this really quick. Let's document this. Remember that we're kind of keeping track here. And so what I'm going to do is probably just create a contrast down here with the cove. That didn't go right. And Kof Lamed, Lamed. And we already know that this is the parent root right here. Okay. That's our parent root. We have the doubled last letter, so we know it's a child root. And we know generally it means to curse, but we're going to work on that. And that somehow is contrasted to this, right? And generally speaking, we kind of came up with kneel for this in the sense of gift. And so we know that a beracha is a gift. The English word blessing is the word gift, right? And so when we're talking about gift, we're talking about an inheritance passed down from one authority to another in jurisdictional authority. Okay, so as a result of that, we need to kind of explore this called Lamed real quick. So I'm going to get the Strong's Concordance number here and jump into our lexicon, and we're going to try to understand our word curse here. Okay. Okay, so kalal is to belittle, to regard or portray as less impressive or important, to be light in weight. Interesting, because that has something to do with glory. To curse or despise in the sense of making light of something, right? Okay, so now let's go over to our parent root, kof lamed, and the concrete is going to be lightness. Okay. And the action is going to be to gather, and of course there is no abstract. So watch this. This is actually really interesting. Picture of Kof is a picture of a sun at the horizon and the gathering of light. The Lamed is the picture of a shepherd's staff representing authority. Combined, these mean gathering to the staff. When the shepherd called the sheep, they swiftly came to him. The staff of the shepherd was his tool of authority, with which he would direct, discipline, and protect the flock. So the shepherd traveled light, allowing him to move swiftly. He carried with him a long staff for directing the sheep as well as to protect them from predators. The shepherd also carried a bag which included dried food goods, including grains and meat, also making light of something or some of someone or something as shame, curse, or dishonor. Okay. So first off, short version is that we kind of have another abstract of an abstract going on here. But what's interesting is there is no abstract in the definition. So the premise was that the shepherd, so this was to call to this was the gathering of the flock, right, to the shepherd, right? When the shepherd called, the sheep would swiftly come to him. The staff of the shepherd was his tool of authority. Now, there's a number of things that we need to talk about here, so we'll go ahead and jump into those really quick. So we've got the word swift, right? The sound of the shepherd that calls to the flock, the voice of a man or musical instrument. Okay. And then we've got Mikhail, and the Hebrew or the feminine Hebrew Mikala, which is a rod or a long and slender bar of wood, a staff for walking, right? Then we have a kali, which is dried foods or grains that the shepherd carried. Then we have kaloon, right here, kaloon. Okay. Shame, one who has become light in stature. And then we've got kalkal, which is something that is light in weight or position or worthless. Okay. Something that is light in weight or stature. And then we've got kalal, to belittle, regard, or portray as less impressive or important, to be light in weight, to curse or despise in the sense of making light. So obviously, what we've got here is of less value, as it were. Then we've got kela'a, right? Kela'a is an annoyance, an act of disturbing or irritating, something that is light in stature, considered worthless as compared with something of greater value or importance. Then we've got kahal, the gathering of sheep to the shepherd, right? Kahal, to round up, to gather together a flock, herd, or group of people. And then we've got kahal is an assembly, which is the equivalent of that is ecclesia in the Greek, right? A large group as gathering of the flock of sheep to the shepherd. And then we've got kahala, which is a banded flock, a large group of as a gathering of the flock to the shepherd. And then we've got Mikhal, which is a pastor where the flock gathers, right? And of course, then we've got Kahila, which is actually one of the words for temple, a large group as a gathering of flock to the shepherd. And then we've got Kala. The shepherd traveled light, allowing him to move swiftly. He carried with him a long staff for directing the sheep as well as to protect them from predators. The shepherd also carried a bag which included dried foods. So Kala, right off the bat, is to have dryness or dishonor, to dry foods meats and to preserve them. Dried foods are carried by the shepherd to be light in stature or worthless. The word kol, the call of the shepherd to the sheep who knew him by sound. When it came time to move, he would call them and they would quickly gather to him. So let's talk about what we've got going on here. Obviously, we've got a very different concept than saying foul words, right? But generally speaking, you could equate, right? Because we have that idea that um dung is useless or worthless and is always kind of a um it's kind of a waste, right? It's kind of something that takes up space but has no use. So what they would do is they would pile it and then set it on fire, right? And so the whole idea here is that dung, right, being used to describe something then makes it of no light. Well, who used curse words? We have two instances of this happening. One of them is Paul, and he goes, I count all of these things to be dung. Well, you change that over to a different language, and we have our American curse word for dung. So, what does that say? That says that it's kind of another Americanese, Christianese thing to be concerned about using that word in light of description of something when you're trying to make it worthless in your emphasis. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, get over it, right? That's number one, get over it. But the second thing I'm saying is that it's being used in a Hebrew sense to remove the weightiness of it, which is the opposite of glory. Remember, glory, kavod, means to be heavy or weighted. And it was in the sense of something being worth something more than another thing because of its weightiness, including the philosophical thought process of authority or the weightiness of or the higher value of something. Okay, so when we're dealing with kalal, we are dealing with lightness or weightlessness. Okay, something is of less value because it does not have a weightiness to it. Okay, so in principle, then a curse would always equate to someone having a lesser value or having a lesser authority. Well, this is interesting because now we're starting to get into a greater and a lesser as a result of blessing versus curse, right? So, a couple things that we need to take into consideration and keep in mind is that anybody who is under jurisdictional authority is actually under jurisdictional authority through the granting or bestowal of authority from a higher authority. Anybody who is under that authority, who is not granted that authority, is in a lesser state. So once that person has received jurisdictional authority, they no longer are the lesser, right? But themselves have been elevated into a state of authority. The perfect model of this would be the woman of valor honoring her husband and being under his authority, but being granted authority by her husband to what? To now execute jurisdictional authority over the stewardship she has been granted, which is what? Raising children, the business that she runs, the land ownership that she has, right? She has this cottage business where she actually creates products and the merchants come and buy from her. But she also is a landowner for the vineyard. She considers a field and buys it and then plants a vineyard there. And her children are not afraid of winter because they'll be warm. They're not afraid of being poor. Her reputation precedes her. She's not in a lesser state in that moment. Where she now steps into a state of being lesser is when she is out of order, right? And that is where the jurisdictional authority granted by Yahweh to the husband to bring that order back into place is executed. But we have the same issue going on with the man. He is disobedient to Yahweh. He is bringing upon himself a curse if he's disobedient to the voice of Yahweh, which is what? Voice of Yahweh is the will of Yahweh, is the Torah of Yahweh, the teaching and instruction of Yahweh, the throwing of the finger. And therefore, Torah itself has a authority over anybody else who is in covenant, right? Who is in the family of Israel, who grafted in or who is bloodline and has accepted the adoptive process. So now what we have is this idea that a blessing is actually an activation of authority over an inheritance that is bestowed upon one who has received the designation of firstborn or joint heir. Okay. And in principle, then what we have is this idea that being cursed is where now your locus of control is external. Life is happening to for you. So then what we start to get into is an understanding of a clear conscience, because we know that if you maintain a clear conscience before God and man, you will be in a state of obedience to God. And in a sense, loving the Lord your God by being obedient. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments, right? What is the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, which is what? Be obedient to him. Something that we are not able to do in the lower self, the cursed self, as it were, we'll call it. But really, all it is a lesser that has not activated within themselves the internal locus of control or the self actualization or what? Stepping into purpose, stepping into potential. Instead, we're walking around being envious, being jealous of what that person has. Do you know jealousy is just an activation of it's just a thing that's activated to let you know you're not walking in your potential, that you are not actually stepping into that state of being the head and not the tail. And so in a weird sort of way, a curse is just a loss of jurisdictional authority or a lack thereof. So then when we get into the idea of abundance and we get into the idea of stewardship and we get into the idea of prosperity, right? Prosperous shall be your kneading bowl. No, that's not what it says. It says your kneading bowl will have authority. It says your children will have authority. It says your female servants and your male servants will have authority. They'll have authority over what? Jurisdictional granting of authority over an inheritance bestowed upon a firstborn or a joint heir with the firstborn. Now we can understand why the blessings would come upon Jacob. The dew of heaven is an absolute act of dominion by Isaac. We know nothing about Isaac, but somehow he owns the dew of heaven enough to be able to grant it jurisdictional authority and stewardship to his son Jacob outside of the realm of a bloodline firstborn inheritance. And then in that function, now we have the idea of what does it mean to be in a state of being cursed? It means life is happening to you, not for you. It means that you have not that internal locus of control. Yahweh is bringing the nation, bring you back into a state of obedience and honor to his covenant. That's the whole idea of the prophets coming and saying, guys, if you don't straighten out, you're going to be kicked out of the land, right? And et cetera, et cetera. And of course, Israel going, yeah, list me with that, pal. Going, yeah, we'll do both. We'll worship God and Baal, right? But then Israel ends up completely exiled because they just kind of thumb their nose at the whole thing. We don't know where they're at anymore. We don't have the 10 tribes to identify, oh yeah, that guy's Issachar, right? We can say that guy's Jew, right? Judah, right? We can say that guy's Levi, right? We can say that guy's Cohen, a priest. We can say that this guy's the tribe of Benjamin. Paul did that. That's it. The rest are gone because they were disobedient. Yes, but also because they refused to walk in the inheritance given to them, where Abraham, after or before circumcision, was given the blessing that all of the families of the earth would be blessed through him. His jurisdictional authority would be granted to the rest of the earth. In other words, how do we have dominion? Through Abraham. Through what? Through him being the father of all who believe, right? All who what? Have accepted covenant and therefore have become circumcised in their heart, right? Circumcised is that of the heart, and being a Jew is one inwardly. And if a Gentile who not having the law, though uncircumcised, does the things of the law, he shows himself to be circumcised. And a Jew who, though having the law, does not the things of the law, shows himself to be uncircumcised, right? And so in principle, then we understand that the inheritance of Abraham, the jurisdictional inheritance of Abraham, the authority granted would then pass down through Isaac to Jacob, etc. But also the premise is that that's where the dominion now comes into play. So then we have a very interesting question to ask because it says that the curse would overtake, the blessing would overtake. And so it seems as though these blessings or these authorities pursue us. Well, that's interesting because this is a this is a conditional process, right? Yahweh said, if then, and if he says if then in principle, what he's saying is if you meet this criteria, then this will activate. And as it's activating, here's the crazy part. It's going to pursue you and overtake you, right? So it will come upon you, it will pursue you, and it will overtake you. That's what he says in those verses. And so what's interesting is it's a pursuer trying to bring jurisdictional authority to you of stewardship, of dominion over the earth. To the extent that you would own the dew of heaven, which again, probably gonna talk about that in the garage. But the premise is that in all of this, we have a higher self, a lower self, a blessing, which is what? Authority, a curse, which is what? A lack of authority. And we have what? Have walking according to the spirit, walking according to the flesh. We walk according to the spirit, that we demonstrate that we are sons of God. Right? All of creation is waiting, groaning with birth pains. Y'all let us know what Paul's talking about there. Groaning with birth pains, waiting for what? The reveal and therefore exposure and demonstrative actions of the sons of God. If you are a son of God, you do God things, which means what? This is not about natural order processes. This is not about the sun shining on the just and the unjust. This is not about physical laws of the universe. This is not about science. This is about something outside of science. This is about something outside of physical processes. This is about something outside of natural order processes. How do we know? Because in principle, it is overly abundant. So then the question is does blessing mean abundance? Yes, kind of. If you take a bucket of jelly beans and you take it and you go and you give it to a human being and you say, I want you to go give these jelly beans to everybody. And by the way, eat as many jelly beans as you want. Of course, their belly is going to be filled with jelly beans. We're not going to discuss what that will turn into, but they get to eat all the jelly beans they want. They have to distribute that entire bucket of jelly beans to everyone else equally without determination of whether they're not, without determination of whether they're trustworthy with those jelly beans, without determination of whether or not they should be giving them away in the first place, but just a willingness to distribute those jelly beans is all that's asked of them, and they get that whole bucket. That storehouse was not filled for you. It was filled for them. You get the benefit from it. You get to fill your belly. Yes, amen. That's life. Behold, I set before you life and death, blessing, authority, and a curse, lack of authority. So the next time somebody sneezes and another person says, God bless you, that's what you want to ask them. Which one? And then after that, you say, so are you granting me authority then? Or what are you granting authority over? I mean, it's kind of confusing, right? Do you see how American Christianity has stuffed the Hebrew back into a corner and decided that that's what it means? Blessed and highly favored. Oh, how are you blessed? By what authority do you operate and speak, right? Oh, yeah, we could go round and round about this. But in the end, in its simplicity, this idea of a gift is an inheritance, and that inheritance has to do with jurisdictional authority to equally distribute the wealth to bless what? That means to give authority. So now watch how this works. Adam is in a state of obedience, purity, etc. with Yahweh. He is given the instruction not to eat from the fruit. Paul says that sin was awakened by the commandment. So now what? Adam goes, why should I not eat the fruit? What's wrong with that fruit? What will it do to me? Right? But he himself does not violate that. Eve comes along, and here's the interesting thing, the first thing that happens after the commandment is given is Adam gets lonely. Eve comes along somehow as an answer to that loneliness, and she now is given instructions by Adam, don't even touch that thing. I will cultivate that. Don't touch it. We'll deal with it. How do we know that? Because Yahweh never said don't touch it. And he told Adam to cultivate the garden. And so therefore he was supposed to what? Help the tree grow that had the fruit in it that he couldn't eat. So Eve comes along and she has this commandment from her husband, which is kind of a Talmudic action of a tachanot, right? I'm going to add to the commandment in order to what? Prevent you from sinning. Okay. Yeah. Adam was the first one to write the Talmud. And so at any rate, then what happens next is Eve goes, I can't eat from this fruit and I can't touch the tree. So she leaves it all alone. Here comes the serpent, whatever that may be. Not going to sit here and accept that there was just this snake in the garden. Okay, sorry, just doesn't work that way in my brain. Anyways, he comes along and he says, hey, has God said you can eat from every tree in the garden? And of course, that was a question Eve answers, should not have even been taught to him, right? But what do we also know? By the end of verse 6, we find out that Adam is present with her while she's talking to the serpent. We'll get into that in a moment. So anyway, she's talking to the serpent, and the serpent says, hey, yeah, you can eat from that. You'll be fine, right? And so then she eats from it. What did she do? At that moment, not only was she disobedient to her husband, your husband said, fitting to the Lord, for in so doing, even without words, you may win your husband, right? Okay, fine. And then what? And so now she has received from Adam jurisdictional authority over the garden, right? How do we know that? Because she is present with Adam as a helper, as it were. She's going to assist him in the cultivation of the garden, creation of animals, right? Where Adam is speaking what they will become. And so now, as she is assisting him or coming alongside him and helping him, now there's this moment where she does not listen to her husband, but she speaks through the serpent. Now, Adam does not take authority over the serpent, nor does he activate that jurisdictional authority of saying, hey, you're not supposed to be talking to my wife, and I don't want to talk about the tree, right? So he sends his wife into that situation without protection and instruction. Now, here goes Eve talking to the serpent. The serpent gives her advice, gives her instruction. What does that mean? He becomes her teacher, and therefore what? An authority. Wives, submit to your husbands as is fitting the Lord. Who else do you submit to? Your teacher, right? So now, all of a sudden, he becomes rabbi. And so he's going to spit this wisdom at her, and she's going to accept that advice, and thereby what? Grant the authority jurisdictionally given from Adam to Eve, or the inheritance or blessing to Eve. He's now going to bless the serpent. This is why this is going to become important. She's going to bless the serpent by granting him jurisdictional authority. How do we know? Because he is lesser. Let them have dominion over the beasts of the field. The serpent is more crafty than any of the other beasts of the field. So now she has what? Jurisdictional authority through the serpent through accepting the advice and eating the fruit. So at this point in time, Adam has two people who he needs to discipline. He needs to discipline his wife. Not sure how that would work out. Not going to get into that because I know what it's like to try to assert your authority now in this day. but then also he needs to exert his authority over his head. Okay, so now what happens? The servant then becomes authority over Eve, but then the voice of his wife speaks to him, which we're not ready for. Well, not saying you're not ready for, because one of the first videos I ever made was about the coal, about the voice of the wife. But the premise is that voice of the wife cries out to him and says, "Hey, this is my heart. This is the direction I want to go." Remember, you can steer your husband with your heart. You don't have to say a word to him. You can steer your husband with your heart. If he's out of order, you can steer him into order. If you're out of order, you're going to steer him out of order. And in that premise now, as she's steering her husband, he takes and eats of the fruit, which you wanted to do in the first place. How do we know? Because James, in the letter of James says, we're led away of our own lust, our own desire, and desire when it is conceived becomes sin. Through one man sin entered the world, but it gets better. Now he has given jurisdictional authority to the serpent by following the instruction of his wife that was given from the serpent to begin with. So now the serpent gives instruction to the woman gives instruction to her husband, and now the serpent is the head and not the tail. Adam is the tail. Adam is cursed, right? Cursed is the ground for your sake. But then watch what happens. In the Psalms, we see the statement, "Blessed are you, Lord God," right? Psalm 144, the blessing for marked parts. "Blessed are you, Lord God, who trains my hands or teaches my fingers to battle and trains my hands for war," right? So, in principle, why in the world would you call Yahweh blessed? Well, here's an interesting concept. You are going to grant to Elohim what? The intensification of all power in the universe. You're going to grant that power to activate through you, jurisdictionally granting authority, just as Eve granted authority to the serpent. You are going to take your jurisdictional authority and grant it to the Elohim of Yahweh. What's the Elohim of Yahweh? The power or energy of God within you. You're going to grant that authority and thereby be the higher self and thereby become blessed, as it were. So every time we say, "Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe," what we are doing is we are granting jurisdictional authority to Elohim within us, right? Because he's within us. We're the temple of the Ruach HaKodesh. We're the temple of the Holy Spirit, granting that authority within us to activate energy. So we have dominion over the earth, but then we have what? Dominion over heaven in the sense of being a son of God, a joint heir with Yeshua, right? In the principle of that idea of granting and blessing, etc. And so here's the crazy part. In a weird sort of way, what you're doing is doing the same thing that Eve did with the serpent. You're accepting that instruction of Torah. And by accepting that instruction of Torah, you're elevating him into a state of jurisdictional authority. So in a weird sort of way, this is how it went. He says, "All right, Adam, here you go. Here's the sandbox. Go play in it, right? Have fun, enjoy yourself, make some sandcastles. Don't 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 mess with that thing over there in the corner. That's cat food. Don't eat that." And so now he comes along, and Adam goes, "Oh yeah, hey, you know what? I appreciate that, but I would like you to help me make this sandcastle come to life." Right? And so now all of a sudden here comes Yahweh and the power of Yahweh within him. And now all of a sudden there is what? Energy. And that energy is what? It's healing, right? It's healing wounds. It's it's um it's healing the body of sicknesses, etc. This is the Ruach HaKadosh. This is the Holy Spirit, the energy or the Elohim of Yahweh within us. And so in that way, when you say, "Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe," you are taking that jurisdictional authority that you were given in the sandbox. I want you to assert your energy or power over it, not authority in the sense that he gave to Adam already, but instead I know that a power greater than myself is going to restore this. I know that it is an energy that is beyond my ego and beyond my capability in this realm of height, width, and time, which is governed by the physical law of the universe, gravity, Newton's three laws, thermodynamics, etc. So the reason why this is important is because now we can understand that a blessing is actually jurisdictional authority granted to somebody who is receiving an inheritance or stewardship of responsibility to not only enjoy the abundance they've been granted, that their belly would be filled and they would be in life, but also that they would equally distribute and therefore become righteous, which brings us to to become sin for us, that we may become the righteousness of God. Remember, a righteous person is someone who equally distributes wealth. A judge is someone who equally distributes justice, right? And so, in principle, then, a righteous judge is somebody who equal distributes wealth and justice. And so in that principle, then we understand that abundance is only going to pursue and overtake those who have become what? Able to be stewards of it. And then in that process, we understand also that that has to do with obedience to the social justice, that the widow and orphan would never cry out for our sakes, right? And so now what we can understand from all of this is that the concept of blessing is related both to Asher and also to Barach. But here's the crazy part. What if we were to now go into the Beatitudes and change the wording from blessed to authority? Okay. So let's do that really quick. And then after that, we will be finished, because that's kind of what I want to leave you with. So now we're going back into Matthew chapter 5. Okay. The authority is granted to the poor in spirit, for theirs is the rulership of heaven, right? Remember, Malchut Hashamayim is the rulership of heaven, not the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn? No. The authority is granted to those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Authority is granted to the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Do you see that the following thing is a jurisdictional authority granting? It wasn't Usher. It was not walking the straight path with a clear conscience. That's good. An important part of this is obedience. But obedience to what? Obedience to the commandments on what you're supposed to do with what you were given, right? That's generally what Torah is what to do with what you are given, okay? And so in principle, that's how it goes. Let's see. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Authority is granted to those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, that they shall be filled. Okay, so you guys see that the idea of hunger and thirsting for righteousness, desire to have enough wealth to distribute to the poor equally. All right, so let's just recap real quick. The first thing that we need to do is discuss the premise of how we have kind of a skewed understanding of what a blessing is. So that's number one. Issue number one. Are we correctly using this word? Obviously not. Number two, what's missing? Why is it missing? Jurisdictional authority over an inheritance is missing, which means what? A, you would have to be in a state of reception. You would have to be able to receive that jurisdictional authority and responsibility, right? By accepting that inheritance, right? And then, of course, there's the premise that that is actually a bestowal or a gift or a granting of property ownership for the sake of continuing the legacy of the clan, right? So we understand that blessing is directly related to the firstborn. We understand that blessing is directly related to an actual gifting of property, ownership, right? Or stewardship. And then we understand that it is possible for you to grant authority to a lesser entity. And in granting that authority to a lesser entity, you have to what? Accept that if you're granting that authority, because here's the part that people don't even think about. When the clan leader was old enough, he could not go out or come in. So he could not go out to war, right? And so the premise is if he could not go out to war, then somebody had to go in instead. Guess what? Whoever was granted that banner and that staff was now authority over the clan leader. Why? Because everybody in the clan answered to the general, as it were, or the star, the prince, right? And the prince then executed his judgment and righteousness. But here's the part that's crazy. If the father was contrary to that, then he would be interfering with the provision, protection, and instruction of the clan. Now, when we look at is shifting gears a little bit. When we look at the word curse, what we find is it has to do with the shepherd's voice, but it has to do with authority and not in the sense of it being granted. The sheep did not have any authority. But also, there is that little tiny piece where it becomes dryness. And I'll remind you that one of the things that happens when you leave the tent is you are exposed to the elements and therefore you become dried out. Remember, bush, the Hebrew word for dry land in Genesis chapter 1, first usage is dry land, but bush means shame. Why? Because you are unclothed, therefore your genitals are exposed, and you are exposed to the elements, the sun, the wind, therefore are dried out. It's all idiomatic of shame. Okay, so the dry, cracked ground where the wind blows over the ground and moves the moisture, saps the moisture out of the ground becomes cracked. It's the same principle of exposure of the body to the elements, and therefore of shame. Because why? Because he was naked and shamed. He covered himself with the fig tree. This all fits together. Adam believed himself to be cursed, therefore he was cursed. Adam no longer believed himself to have the authority, and therefore he didn't have it. Right? Now, what's interesting is that when we start to get into who or what the serpent is, and we start to get into the concept of how the serpent activated himself into Eve, Adam, and what that created, and we start to get into the concept of drawing things to ourselves that are absolutely bad for us, right? Okay. So I think you get it. I think you guys understand concept of blessing is not what you thought it was. And you understand that the conscience is different. The Asher that's mentioned in not only the name Asher, but is mentioned in the concept of blessing has nothing to do with blessing, but instead contentment or the uh, happiness of walking a straight path. Whereas God is a gift of inheritance to and jurisdictional authority to an heir, usually the firstborn, but in some cases it is a dynamic of firstborn, like a joint heir. Okay. All right. So for those of you who are on YouTube, I will say Shabbat Shalom. And I hope that we'll see you next week. And we'll go ahead and end the live stream right now.